Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the final round for the second series of solo sessions. Our final contender, trying to learn interesting things and survive my horrid attention, is Mertin Krieg, the bounty hunter. So, with that, let's get right to it. Mertin, it has been about a day following the rather maddening series of events that took place in the Poor Quarter, where numerous people were transformed before your eyes into horrid abominations, but because of the courage of the four of you, you managed to strike them down. Though you in particular were extremely affected by what you saw and what occurred, and have not slept well the last night or so due to the haunting nightmares of the Chaos Spawn in particular that you did battle with. But your sanity is mostly intact, and as you distance yourself from the memory, you find that you're recovering fairly nicely.
Alright, how am I healed up from going to the Sisters of Shalia at the end of that?
Yes, you are healed up.
Alright.
So, today is the day that you are supposed to visit the palace.
Alright. I will come down and I will go over to Holst.
Okay.
So Holst, I was wondering, would you happen to have a bucket and some rags you do not cherish very much?
He frowns at you for a moment and says, I think I could turn something like that up. What do you need it for, if you don't mind me asking?
I thought I would clean myself up as much as I could before I went out and tried to find something. He will pause and kind of pick at his torn and tattered and very bloody clothing, more appropriate for the meeting I have today.
He nods and sort of chuckles and says, Aye, lad, I can set you up. And he reaches down and grabs a hold of a bucket, and he goes around his table and picks up a couple of various rags and throws them in.
Alright, Mertin will go and have a peasant's bath up in his room. Which is to say he wipes himself down with wet rags, because that works.
Fair enough. Would you like to go shopping for some proper wares, whatever, clothing?
Yeah, first, I want to ask Holst if I can get some the medical herb pouches things that the Michael always uses.
So you're asking him for some pretty much small cloth packages with a tiny bit of string.
Yeah, the healing poultices.
Okay, he sort of nods and says, well, if you're not providing the herbs yourself, I must ask for a small compensation just because it takes man-hours and time to gather such things.
Oh, of course. I very much feel that it is a sound investment. And Mertin will point at the huge new scars on his head.
Holst actually seems moderately impressed that you have not at least been given a severe concussion to the various wounds you've had. And he nods, and he will sell you them for about... Let's see. He'll sell you them for about 6 brass pennies apiece.
I'll buy, let's say 4 of them.
Okay, that'll cost you 2 silver. I will note at this point that unless someone with the heal skill is using them, they are completely worthless.
Oh yeah, I just don't want the priest to run out.
Fair enough. It's
I'm
good to be a cautious
be
man.
The main one. Alright, then Mertin will head out to try to get some decent clothes. Actually, Holst, would you know a good spot to get some clothes where, say, your recommendation might get me a better deal?
He scratches his chin for a moment and says, Well, if you head into the market, you should be able to find something of value without hurting yourself too much. There's a man there who might sell something you're looking for. I believe you might think he's a blacksmith by his wares, but he does have a rather half decent clothing business going for him. I believe his wife makes the materials.
Okay, thank you. I think I have seen the man before. Mertin will nod and head out to talk with that blacksmith.
All right. To the market, then. All right. You arrive in the market, and you see the blacksmith. Sure enough. And you do see that there's actually some materials that are along the lines of what you're looking for in his stall. Though beneath him is someone who also sells very similar wares that you might find interesting.
I will go and look at the similar wares of the guy beneath him first.
Okay.
Hello, sir. I was thinking of getting myself some better clothing.
Alright. Sorry, give me one sec. This thing's fighting me. Okay. Oh, it's fighting me hard. That's not very good. Whoa, easy there. Interesting. Alright. He sort of nods vaguely in your direction, says, and he sort of looks your body up and down, and he says, "What kind of clothing?"
Well, I thought I should get some clothes that were of a fine cut, something in style, apparently. I am not very knowledgeable about how this clothing of the more expensive brand of clothing goes.
He holds up one of his hands and gestures for you to spin around.
Mertin will spin.
Okay, as you do so, he looks at you thoughtfully for a moment while I summon another model. And he nods and says, I think I can make something for you.
Oh dear God.
Why can I not resize anybody on this map? This map's acting up. It sucks. Well, I'll fix it later. As you're spinning, you hear someone approach you from behind. And as you turn, you see a familiar figure.
Oh, hello, Holmes. Holman. How are you doing?
He nods and looks rather amused and says, "What is it you're working on there?"
I am learning to dance. Well, no, I'm trying to find some new clothes.
He raises an eyebrow and says, "You, looking for new clothes? Sorry, you don't catch me as that sort of person."
Well, I can't wear this forever. And it does put, a dampening on the conversations I can have with certain people.
He grins and sort of looks at the man behind you who's sorting through various stacks of clothing. And he leans over and says, "You can buy from this guy if you want, but he doesn't really have the best prices."
Oh, really?
He nods and says, "Yeah, the stuff he sells you will come apart if there's a stiff enough breeze."
Do you know someone better?
He points his thumb at the blacksmith hammering away and says, "Yeah, I worked with him when I got my clothing for my wedding a few years back. He'll steer you fair."
Alright, then. I thought I should check out the man who had, well, all the cloth first.
He shrugs and says, you might take a look at what he sees, but I can assure you he'll charge you at least twice as much as it's actually worth."
Well, I can always walk away.
He nods and says, "By the way, I just wanted to thank you for earlier. I found a job not too long ago."
Oh, good. It is working well for you?
He nods and says, "Yeah, I've been hired on with quite a few other people from across my part of the city to work on rebuilding the East Gate."
Oh, well, that is a very important job.
He sort of swells up a bit and he says, "And it's honest work, too. No more stealing for me."
Yes, good job. Have you moved into the new house?
He nods and says, yeah, it's not much, but it's better than living in essentially a gutter.
Did you get that note that I sent you?
He nods appreciatively and says, yeah, we're being careful.
Good, good.
At this, he sort of, he pulls out a small, not very detailed map of Nuln, and with a small area circled, and he says, you should come over and join us for dinner sometime, maybe next week if you're, looking for something to do. And he looks a little sheepishly down at the ground.
Maybe. I will see if I can fit it in.
He nods and says, well, if you do, my wife's a great cook. We'd love to have you over.
I will be looking forward to it.
He grins and nods, and he sort of looks up at the sun and he says, oh, I should probably get going. I'm going to miss my shift if I don't hurry.
Right. Farewell.
And he wanders off. About that time,
Mertin will turn back to the shopkeeper. What has he been doing?
He has just finished sort of dragging some okay-looking clothes. Don't look like they'd fit you particularly well, but they're nice-looking, you guess. And he throws them rather roughly down on the stall before you. And he says, will this do?
Evaluate is a advanced skill, correct?
That is correct.
Mertin will look them over and ask how much.
He sort of scratches his chin for a moment. He says, 10 gold crowns, by my reckoning. Some pretty high-quality work there.
So, just wondering, does this shirt have, like, buttons and fancy bits, or is it just, like, a sackcloth?
It's about halfway.
Halfway to what? To sackcloth?
No, it's like, it's between sackcloth and really fancy. So, like, the material's alright, but it's got a couple of stains in various places. There are buttons, but one of them's missing. And it doesn't look like it would fit you spectacularly well.
I think I might go and look around and see if I can find something that will fit me better. So, it does look like it is made of very fine material.
He shrugs and roughly takes the material away from you, throws it back in the little chest he pulls it from, and proceeds going back to his own work.
Mertin will go to the guy he probably should have gone to first.
Okay, you approach the blacksmith, who's hammering away at something he's working on. Looks to be some sort of axe, though it's in pretty early stages.
Hello, how goes the forging?
Yeah, he looks up with a frown and then, somewhat recognizing you, perks up a bit and says, ah, I remember you lot. What can I do for you today? And he sort of looks down at the axe and says, and it's going alright. It's still probably going to be a day or so before it's anywhere near ready.
Holst said that you were the one to come to. I was looking to get some better, fancier clothes.
He scratches his chin for a moment and said, Holstinch, eh? And he looks you up and down for a moment and says, follow me into the back here. And he steps further back into, if I can click on him, my goodness. And he steps further back into the stall. I say that, but for some reason I cannot seem to click on him. This is very annoying. I'll have to work on this later. In any event, you move further back into the stall, and he has you actually stand next to a very nice assortment of clothing, and he sort of sticks his tongue out one side of his... seems to be thinking very hard as he compares... he steps forward and sort of like leans one of his arms against you for measurement, and then goes and leans against one of the clothes and seems to look around for a few minutes. After a little bit, he brings out a very nice... sort of leather, almost like a leather jack legging combination, but obviously not made of leather. It's made of a much finer material. And he nods as he hands it to you and says, this should be a fairly good fit, I believe.
So you said leather?
It's not leather, I just said it's similar to that, like covering the same parts of the body.
Oh, okay.
No, it's more of a fine cloth material. Your character is not very educated in what it could actually be. It's very comfortable. It's soft, and it looks nice. There's no stains on it, and all the buttons are there, and they're nice little brass buttons.
I will finger the cloth and look at the blacksmith and says, "This is a very fine-feeling cloth here."
He shrugs and says, it's a hobby for my wife. Keeps her busy.
Has the dwarf's tips with his smithing helped?
He sort of, at this he shrugs a bit and says, vaguely, I suppose. He wasn't exactly the best smith I've ever met.
Well, maybe he is getting better. He has been spending lots of time with the dwarves in the Dwarven district.
He nods and says, I've met their lot once. Not exactly the nicest bunch, but they'll do honest by you.
How much should this cost? I am not familiar with the clothing of this quality.
He sort of grabs it and looks at it for a moment. And he says, my wife usually tells me to sell this for about... He sort of squints for a moment and says, I think she says usually sell it for about 8. It costs us, material-wise, probably more in the ballpark of 3. I'll charge a 5 for it this time.
That would be very kind of you. I would gladly take this, and have a few more shillings. I would not want to beggar you, or cheapen the amounts your wife can get from it.
He shakes his head and pushes the additional money away and says, please, it's a favor for Holst and paying you back for your help in making sure we're getting some regular materials again. My wife was going nuts just being stuck with regular sackcloth.
Well then I will greatly appreciate the gesture.
Okay, you lose 5 gold crowns and you gain a set of good quality clothing.
Alright then, I will... Did Holst tell me a time I was supposed to get there by?
He only said that you're supposed to be there at some point today. The letter did not seem to specify, at least if it did, Holst didn't say anything about it. But it's still before noon right now.
Okay. I will... How long will it take to get back to Holst?
It'll probably be at least noon by the time you get there.
Alright, I think I'll head to the upper district. The better kind of people.
Okay. So, you head up through the city. And you approach the gates leading into the wealthier quarter, which are obviously... I don't know why everything's so off today. Which is obviously these little breaks in the wall.
Okay.
I may need to refresh my page here in a minute. But as you make it to the first of the gates, some guards step forward and stop you immediately. Upon seeing your higher quality clothing, they don't seem to take an overly aggressive or antagonistic stance toward you. But one of them merely sits forward and says, papers, please.
I will pull out the seal and show it to him.
Okay, he looks down at it and frowns for a moment, and quickly hands it back to you, and he sort of frowns and says, what business are you here on?
I was asked to come.
He raises an eyebrow and says, was there a name?
No, there was just a seal. It said that it would allow me in.
He nods and says, very well. You'll be coming with us then, but we will need to blindfold you. We hope you can be understanding.
I hope so. I will try not to stub my toes.
He nods and gestures 2 men forward, and they're not rough with you by any means, but they do blindfold you and put a cloth over your head so you can't see where you're going, and they guide you through the streets rather quickly. After about an hour of walking, though they're very careful with you and make sure you don't run into anything, you feel yourself walk out of the sun and into a room, and as you're standing there, they remove all of your all the cloth and the blindfold and leave the room, and there's a single man sitting ahead of you. Give me 1 sec. And upon looking around the room you are in, it is a very, very nice, very, like, the stones are very clean, it's very impeccable. There are some very large, menacing statues of, looks like some sort of maybe hero that was important to Nolan at some point. And sitting before you at a small, fairly small table, drinking what looks to be some sort of tea and sitting with a game board in front of him, is a man you have never seen before, wearing some very, very nice looking clothing that has some. It looks like someone took a set of silk clothing and very carefully interweaved it with some armor. So it looks both practical and very nice.
Mertin will attempt a very nervous and bad bow.
The man looks up at you, and he has a very piercing. He has very piercing blue eyes. He has a very menacing aura to him, but he doesn't seem overtly hostile. That being said, he does have a very grim aspect. He's definitely a good deal older than you. He looks like he's probably in his 40s or early 50s. And he gestures for you to sit down across the table from him.
I will sit down across the table.
He gestures to the game board in front of him and says, "Have you ever played?"
No, I have not had the pleasure.
He shrugs and says, "That's a pity. I was hoping to perhaps get a game in during business, but I'm afraid I don't have the time to explain the rules, so let's just get straight to it."
Well, actually, have I seen this game before?
You have
guessing
not.
not.
No. You have not lived a life of luxury where you have had time to sit down and learn to play chess. Well, checkers. The Warhammer equivalent of checkers.
I will wait patiently for him because he hasn't asked me to do anything yet.
He looks up at you and seems to... His eyes narrow and he seems to be taking your measure, and you feel very scrutinized.
Mertin will not try to cover up the huge gaping wounds on his head.
Well, they're not gaping, but... He nods and leans back a bit in his chair and says, "So, as I'm to understand it, you're the bounty hunter that dealt with Borgen the Red for us?"
That would be true, yes.
He nods and takes another sip of his tea, and then gestures to the pot. "Would you like some?"
I do not think I have ever had tea. I would very much like to try it.
He nods and he pours you a cup and seems to throw in some materials that you know exist, such as honey and sugar, but have never had quite the luxury to enjoy.
I watch him drinking his tea and try to mimic what he does.
You don't have quite the air of aristocracy that he does about him, but you try.
Well, I didn't say I'd be good at it.
He nods for a moment and says, "You see, I've been recently looking for someone of your talents for finding people and bringing them in alive."
Mertin will nod.
"We appreciate your efforts in bringing in Borgen. He was in rough shape, but good enough shape that we were able to repair him enough to suffer some more focused attention so that we could learn the information we needed from him. And for that, you have my thanks."
It is an honor to serve the Countess in this, or whoever else may need it.
He seems to smirk and scratches above his eyebrow for a moment. He says, "Pardon my manners, it's been a long day. I am Johann Ebner. I am the chancellor to the Countess." And he gestures, or he holds out a hand to shake.
Mertin will shake his hand and probably wince at the grip.
Nah, not so much.
Okay.
He seems very measured in everything he does. As he pulls back his hand, he stares at the game board for a moment and he says, "I'm sure you're aware of the fact, based on the little party you've been running around with, that these are not exactly the best times for our glorious city."
No, I am afraid I have seen that firsthand.
He nods and Seems to be flicking a piece off the board every time he names something, and he says Skaven, Chaos, Mutants, Cultist, Beastmen, the One Eye, Greenskins, Spiders. There are a lot of problems that need dealing with, it seems.
That was quite a list longer than I thought it would be.
He smirks at you and he says, "That's only the list that I know that you're aware of, but trust me, it stretches on for much longer than that."
I do not envy you your job.
He shrugs, and he folds his hands on the table and says, "So, then let's get to why we're here. You're looking for Viktor, correct?"
Yes.
He nods and says, "Viktor is proven to be a rather interesting individual. He's now working as the right-hand man of our very own captain of the guard, and has proven himself quite useful to our captain's, shall we say, personal interests."
Ah. Mertin will look around awkwardly.
He raises an eyebrow and says, "That being said, the captain has been acting odd recently. A little too odd. The way he's been looking at the Countess, the few times that she's allowed him to grace her presence for commands and such, there's something different about him, and I suspect that this Viktor is somehow involved."
Well, when I last had track of him, it was in a town to the north. He had met up with some rather, how do you say it, prosperous-looking men talking about a venture here in Nuln.
He nods and says, "Viktor has done quite well for himself in our city. That being said, he's very quickly becoming a nuisance. One that I would like dealt with."
Is that so? Does the captain of the guard share your beliefs?
He smirks and says, "Let's just say the captain and I have a myriad of disagreements. That being said, I have your first contract for you. If you're willing to work for me, in secret, of course, you will be a benefactor of the Countess and deal with a few problem causers of ours. The first, of course, leading your way towards Viktor, so that you might ensure that his influence on our dear captain is removed. Of course, if the captain continues to be a problem, we may give you some more interesting jobs."
Very well, I think that it is in my interest to help Nuln, and I have been hunting Viktor for a long time.
He nods and says, "So I have heard, Mertin Krieg. You're quite an interesting individual lately, and are traveling with quite the interesting little group. An elf, a dwarf, a doomsayer of more, and a bounty hunter. A rather interesting little collective, wouldn't you say?"
Yes, it is not the most auspicious of groups.
He nods and says, "That being said, the work you've been doing for the city is notably useful. So, consider what we have a personal arrangement. You work for us, I'll make sure you're safely compensated, and we'll ignore some of the potential damages your little party causes to the city while pursuing their own objectives."
That sounds like a more than fair arrangement.
He nods. "That being said, I would beware of the Nuln Guard if I were you. Although I technically have dominion over them, the captain seems to also be aware of your little party and has been taking, shall we say, an unfavorable opinion towards some of your actions."
Well, I will try not to cause a ruckus. That would be awkward.
He nods. At this, he takes another sip of tea and he says, "Very well then. Your first contract will be sent to you once it's ready. We should have it there by the end of the week. There's a man working for Viktor that we think could provide us with some good enough information to convict the little worm. We'll need you to find him and to bring him in alive, not dead."
Very well. I do have to warn you of one thing. I cannot read. Is there someone I could trust to read me the bounty that you are sending?
He raises an eyebrow and then nods and says, "Of course. I'll be sure that the courier who is sent waits to make sure that the message is delivered truthfully and concisely."
All right. Thank you.
He nods and says, "Oh, and as a sign of good faith, we have decided to cover the cost for that pelt you turned in not too far at the that Holst brought to the upper district. You should consider yourself fortunate. He took it to the greatest tanner in all of Nuln."
I was not aware that he had. Thank you very much.
He shrugs. "Do give Holst my best. He has been very helpful in serving the Countess in the past. We long regret the day that he decided to retire."
All right. So host is welcome to read me the bounty.
He nods. "If that is what you prefer, we don't have to send a courier."
Well, it might be more discreet that way.
He smirks and says, "I think you'll do well in your new position, Mertin Krieg. Welcome to the Nuln Secret Service."
I will try to serve as best I can.
He nods and says, "Ah, and of course a crucial part of being a member of the secret police is for it to be secret, my dear friend."
I will not go and tell everyone I know then, which will not be hard. I do not know many people in this town.
He nods. "Yes, and do keep an eye on that little party of yours. Do try your best to make sure they're out acting in the city's best interests. I would hate for you to become a contract of yourself."
That would be an unpleasant contract.
He flashes you a way too white smile, and then gestures at the door, and you hear it opening. He says, "Well, it's been a pleasure, Mertin. If you have no further questions, then."
Mertin will take one last sip of his tea, set it down, bow, and head out.
Okay, as you head out, you are once more blindfolded and have a bag shoved over your head. About 2 hours pass, and when it's finally ripped off and you are gently pushed away from the gate, you find yourself once more standing outside the gates to the more influential quarter of the city.
I will head back to the market. I need to get a net because I will probably kill someone with Ebola.
Okay, actually, I'll just have you go. I'm going to move you back to the Iron Bull, but you may shop normally.
Okay.
Market's not exactly the best place for looking for weapons. Alright, you search around the city for a time, trying to locate a good net maker, and you actually stop by a guy who primarily deals in fish, as your character is clever enough to put two and two together, and he does have some pretty quality nets out for sale. Eh.
I will greet the man behind the bell. I assume he does not have a counter here. It's a net maker.
Yeah, it's a bit more of just sort of a empty space where he's got lots of different various size nets strung up, and he's weaving one as you walk in.
I will greet him as I come in. Hello, I am looking for, well, a very specialized kind of net.
He frowns at the word specialized and nods for you to continue.
Mertin will take out one of his bolas and explain that he needs something for man catching rather than fish.
The man nods, and he basically provides you with a net, assuming you pay for it, of course, that is more than capable of catching some of the legendary spearfish that can be found out on the river, which tend to be at least twice the size and at least 5 times the weight of even the heaviest man.
So this looks better than the net I had before.
Oh yeah.
Once upon a time.
This is not a joke of a net.
I will nod to him and ask how much.
He offers it to you for 5 gold.
Out of character. Failing a haggle check makes it worse, right?
Not necessarily.
I will risk the haggle check.
Okay.
Are you sure it's at 5 is the lowest you can go?
He nods.
Alright, then. Thank you for the honesty. And Mertin will pay the 5 gold.
Alright, you pay him 5
Like a
gold,
chump.
and you gain yourself a net. Though, it's a bit larger than the average net. So it might be a little bit more useful to you in some endeavors.
Like when gigantic spiders try to attack me?
Yeah, that might be a good example.
Alright, the net has been added. I will nod to the shopkeeper and I will leave and head back to Holst, because he apparently has my cloak.
Okay, you head back to the Iron Bull. By the time you get there, it is very late evening. Between you making a stop at the market and, of course, visiting the upper quarter, Holst and everyone within the bar, in fact, has already gone to bed. And you do not see any of your companions around.
Well, Holst, this is a surprise. The dwarf is not here drinking.
Holst is not there either. Everyone is asleep.
Oh, wow.
It is like 2 in the morning.
Okay, so really late.
Yes.
I'm gonna go to bed then.
All right, you go to bed. You wake up fairly late morning. You vaguely catch the sound of the dwarf thundering down the stairs and heading out. And you could swear you hear the whisperings of some of your other companions, but when you awake and head downstairs, you find you're once more just you and Holst actually sitting rather lonely at his bar. Okay, hold on, I need to reload the page because I'm not able to turn anybody. It's pissing me off. There we go. Holst nods to you and says, "Ah, Mertin, welcome back. I trust
Good morning,
your..."
Holst.
He winks and says, "I trust your meeting went well."
Yes, it went well.
He
I am
nods.
back. I have all my fingers.
He nods with a smirk. He says, "By the way, I probably should have mentioned it earlier, but that seal that was included to the letter, I wouldn't exactly go around flaunting it around, let's just say."
Well, I did not think it would be wise to have others question why I have something that I obviously should not have.
He nods. By the way, are you still wearing your good quality clothing, or have you changed back to your regular common?
I've changed back to my common because I'm assuming I'm going out for a bounty after this.
Okay. Alright, you changed back to your common clothing. Cool, just wanted to note it.
So Holst, it seems that things are empty already.
He nods and almost looks around a little concerned and says, "Aye, it's been a little busy with you lot lately. Everyone's been running in and out. I barely catch a glimpse of anyone."
Yes, well damn, I was hoping to get some pointers on how to use a longbow from the elf.
He sort of smirks in your direction and says, "I don't know if the elf's the sort to be honest with you on that."
Well, the elf will yell at me when I do it wrong. I want to be able to tell her it's her fault.
He sort of frowns for a moment, scratching his chin, says, "Honestly, you'd probably be better off just heading up a practice yard, maybe outside the city."
Oh, do you know of one?
He nods and says, "Really, you can just head out west. The western gate is still operational last I heard. Thankfully for them, that stone didn't hit that gate. There's a practice field not too far from there where just some of the regular newcomers to the Gnome Guard work on their archery as well. They shouldn't have much of a problem with you using their arrows so long as you provide your own weapon."
Oh, so that would be nice. Thank you for telling me that. I understand that something of the pelt I asked you to find a tanner for has been sent back, yeah?
He pulls out a letter and sort of waves it at you, and he opens it. And as he's about to talk, he sort of frowns down at it for a moment, and then looks back up at you and frowns down at it for a moment, and he says, yes, it says that you should be there in a few days. He frowns and says, I'm not sure why it got pushed back a week. I should have been ready by now. Check back with me in a few days. I'll see what's going on with it.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for taking it to such a esteemed personage. I did not know that you had gone out of your way for that.
He grumbles something incoherent, waving you away, and busily gets back to work.
Did you have a letter for me besides that one?
He looks a little... He sort of looks around his... underneath his bar for a moment, looks up at you again, frowning. He says, why? Were you expecting something else?
No, they did not tell me when. I have a bounty being sent, and I did not know when it was coming, so I wanted to check.
He nods and says, I'll be sure you know first thing when it arrives.
Alright, thank you, host. An ale for the road, as it were.
He nods and pours you pours you one in his personal flask and tosses it to you and says, I would bother telling you to bring it back, but I think you know the drill by now.
Yes, it is not good to leave a man without his flask. He will toast the flask to Holst, take a sip, thank him, and head out towards the archery stuff in the west gate.
Okay. You make it out of the west gate and head out into the fields. We'll just move to the map of Nuln for this. And it doesn't take you long to find that they have turned the field a little ways northeast of Westdorf into a rather large and impressive practice field. There's about 300 men out there practicing. Most of them look like they're definitely greenhorns. That being said, there are plenty of places to practice, and you notice the occasional odd person who clearly is not a member of the Nuln Guard come out and firing shots, but the captain running the area, or the lieutenant, I should say, doesn't seem overtly concerned about their presence. The only thing that you notice is that when one person tried to leave before retrieving his arrows, the captain, or the lieutenant, proceeded to shout at him and berate him until the man recovered those munitions he had used.
Alright, I will approach the nearest unbusy officer who's in charge so that I can make sure it's okay I go in.
Okay, that lieutenant's actually probably the closest guy to you, and he's the only guy that looks like he seems to be vaguely in charge. After he sends that younger gentleman scurrying for the hills after having collected his arrows, he seems to focus his eyes on you and notices you looking around and starts approaching you.
Hello, Lieutenant. Holst sent me here. He said that perhaps you might have a extra spot on the training field.
He frowns at you for a moment, and he seems to be chewing on some sort of piece of grass. He says, I don't know who Holst is, but if you're just looking for target practice, you can use here. That being said, should the city come under fire and I find you not on the walls, I'll kick your ass.
Would it be acceptable to be fighting them in the streets if they are already in there?
He gives you an annoyed look and doesn't respond, but picks up a quiver and shoves it very roughly into your hands and storms off to go yell at some of the recruits who are goofing off.
Right then, fight on the walls. Got it. I will go over to the archery range and probably fail terribly.
Okay, you spend most of the day very carefully until your arms are horrendously sore and your fingers are probably a little not, pretty raw, firing arrows. But your skill improves bit by bit, and that same lieutenant occasionally comes over and grumbles some pretty surprisingly good advice in your direction every time he passes by. He seems to cycle around you every hour or so, though he seems to make it very much look like that he isn't coming over just for the sake of giving you advice.
Alright. How many arrows have I lost by bad rolls?
None of the arrows that you fire out into the field are lost, and you're using their supply, so you won't need to worry about it.
Alright.
They have young boys who their only job for like a few pennies a day is to go run out and collect all the arrows from the field at the end of the day. So they're not overtly concerned about it, though they get pretty pissed if you shoot into the dummy and try and leave without retrieving the arrows you used.
No, I will retrieve the arrows. I was just checking, because if I broke any, I was going to replace them with my own.
No, most of them are even practice arrows, like they're not especially sharp. And there are literally tens of thousands of them. Like, a ridiculous amount. One arrow breaking would probably not even concern them in the slightest.
Alright. I will wearily stop and look at my blistered fingers and think that I should probably head back. It's getting late, correct?
That is correct.
I will head back to the inn, and I'm going to make sure no one follows me back to the Iron Bowl.
Okay, as you head back, roll a perception check. You do not believe anyone's following you.
Alright, good.
Alright, you make it to the inn. Your companions still aren't there. There's a couple of random folks, random patrons, about nobody that looks particularly interesting or unusual.
So I will go up to Holst and wince as I pull out his flask with my slightly, well, scraped up fingers and hand it to him.
He sees your fingers and grimaces a bit and gently takes the flask from you and starts wiping off some of the little bits of blood. And he looks up. He looks up with a smirk and says, "Long day then."
Yes, it has been a very long day.
He grins for a moment and says, "So did you manage to hit any, or did you just completely miss the entire time?"
Well, I hit one. It wasn't the one I was aiming at, but I hit some of them.
He chuckles quite loudly, and he says, "Ah, that reminds me back in the day when I was out in the fields. I was a pretty good handgunner for quite some time before I was promoted into a halberdier's rank. I once hit a beastman. Wasn't the one I was aiming for. He was actually one a couple behind, but the bastards were so thick, it was pretty hard to miss."
Well, I do not think that I've ever actually held a gun, so I would not know how difficult it is. Is it like the gap between the crossbow and this thing? And he will kind of gesture at his longbow.
He seems to think thoughtfully for a moment. He says, I suppose it's something along those lines. Makes your shoulder ache something fierce till you get used to it, and the smoke makes you feel like you're choking on air. But other than that, it's not too bad. Certainly satisfying when it punches through something that's going to cut you in half should it make it across the distance.
That would be satisfying.
He nods and says, "Terrible bastards take forever to load, though. Definitely not a great weapon in any sort of close quarters fight."
So has the others not come back yet?
He shakes his head and says, "Nah, they've been through, just occasionally. I haven't seen them overtly much. That being said, I haven't seen the elf or the Moride today."
No, Mertin will look around and ask, "So, I understand that the guard captain is not on friendly terms with everyone."
He gives you a very sharp look and he said, "And who's telling you that?"
Well, the friend I don't have.
He gives you a very long look and actually gets a pretty serious look on his face and says, "You should be very careful who you call a friend in this city, Mertin. There's some people who don't necessarily have the best interest for you lot in mind."
Understood, host. I'll keep it in mind.
He nods and says, "As for the captain of the guard, I can assure you he is a right terrible bastard. If it weren't for that damn demigriff of his, he probably wouldn't have even gotten the position."
He has a demigriff?
He nods and says, "Beautiful beast. It's very, very fierce, though. Keeps his men in line."
He's a knight then?
He seems to sort of wince and says, I suppose if you wanted to call him that, you could. I don't think of him as much of a knight myself, but I have no respect for the man.
Well, I would not expect someone with a demigriff to be just staying here as a captain of the guard.
At this, he chuckles and says, You'd be right to expect that. Let's just say his foul reputation got him in quite a bit of trouble, and the captain of the guard is the highest station he can manage at the moment.
That must have really been something.
He frowns and says, Let's just say when people disobey him, he tends to take his punishments a little too seriously. The Countess was not particularly thrilled when she learned what he was up to.
Ah. Well, host, thank you for the drink. It was handy when things went bad at the archery range.
He nods, and he takes out, he actually goes down into his cellar for a moment and comes back up with a pretty refrigerated one. Like it's legitimately cold, and holds it out and says, That ought to help your hand some.
Oh, thank you. My, this is cold.
He winks and says, Dwarf-made cellar does wonders.
Ah. I wonder if the dwarf has figured that out yet.
At this, he chuckles and sort of slaps his belly and says, "By Sigmar, I hope not. I don't want to have to worry about that stout little bastard trying to sneak down there every time he gets the chance."
Well, I will keep your secret.
He grins and shouts at one of his servers to get over to someone waving for another drink.
So Sotek, if I
Yes.
want to just gossip and figure out what people are saying in the city about the stones, would that just be a gossip check, or?
Yep,
how
that would
I go
just be a
about
gossip check. You could literally just walk up to a random person and roll the gossip check. That being said, you actually have to say what you're asking.
Okay. Hello. How are you doing today?
It's a woman, and she's actually she's very lean. This is someone who looks like she's definitely a warrior in her own right. And she sort of smirks in your direction, and she says, I'm doing all right, handsome. How are you?
Well, all my usual drinking companions seem to have wandered off tonight.
She gestures at the seat next to her, and she says, well, feel free to join me then.
Alright. Mertin will sit down and ask if she's heard any news about those stones. Everyone seems to be talking about them.
She leans forward, nodding, and takes a drink. She says, I've heard some pretty interesting things about it. They say it's wreathed in constant flame, kills anybody that touches it. At least that's what I've heard. I stay away from things like that. I don't find magic much to my liking.
Well, what kind of idiot would touch it? Mertin
She
will
shrugs.
chuckle inside his head.
She shrugs and says, don't know, but I hear there's a few doomsayers around the city that have started to gather to worship the thing, saying that it's a sign of Sigmar's disappointment in all of us. Damn madmen.
A few of the doomsayers. I wasn't aware there were so many known at this time.
She raises an eyebrow and she says, you must not get around the major cities much then. There's always some group of crazies thinking that the end times are right around the corner.
Well, yes, but they are usually crazies, not the doomsayers of more.
At this, she shakes her head with a chuckle and she says, my apologies, I wasn't aware that you were actually aware. I wasn't aware that you knew someone like that within the Morite order. These are not priests or initiates, these are merely crazy folk. Old men who've lost their minds to time or horrible ravages.
Now, does that make more sense? I was very worried for a second. There's sort of a whole cult of those priests all here at once.
She nods and says, Morites don't make the best of company, though if you know anything about a doomsayer, then I'd have to guess that you've had dealings with them.
Yes, I would not want to worry you, but there's one staying in this establishment.
She whistles appreciatively and says, huh, sounds like a more interesting place than I first took it for, then.
Yes, if you are lucky, he will have a drinking contest with the dwarf again.
She smirks and says, I joined, but I wouldn't want to embarrass a dwarf. They tend not to take kind to those sorts of things.
I doubt he would take it kindly, yeah.
She almost seems to lean... Well, she doesn't almost seem to. She leans closer to you and she says, "And what's your name?"
I am Mertin Krieg.
She nods and she says, "Alexa, nice to meet you, Mertin Krieg."
Nice to meet you too. It is nice to meet someone who gives their name when you meet them.
She shrugs, and now that she seems to have calmed down and fairly lightened up to your presence, in no small part due to your excellent gossip roll check, you can appreciate that she's a fairly attractive woman.
Mertin will acknowledge this and not pursue.
How boring. She makes some advances on you throughout the evening, but Mertin does his best to hold her at bay.
Uh-oh.
In fact, she buys you a drink. Will you drink it? She tries to match you 1 for 1.
Uh-oh, I'm in a drinking contest, aren't I?
Mayhaps, if you accept. She has a very devilish look in her eye. That she seems to be overtly enjoying herself in your
Well, no one else is here. Yeah, I will try this thing, and he will drink his drink.
Okay. She grins and tells you, "I'll make you a deal. If I win..." She goes, "I'll make you a deal. If I win, how about you pay for drinks? If you win, I'll pay for drinks."
Fine. But when you drink me under the table, that's when it stops. When I pass out. If you cannot drink the dwarf, I think you may be up all night, and my purse can't handle that.
She nods and says, "Very well. Sounds like a deal." Okay, you two drink up. Take a consume alcohol check. Okay, you fail your first one. She takes a drink, and from what you can tell, either she has an excellent poker face, which may actually be the case, or she's doing quite fine. Take another one, as Holst amusedly keeps providing you with ale. You fail again. She downs another one, almost in about 3, bringing it up to her lips, and her face is red, but she seems very amused. Next one.
Wow, this is some good stuff.
Okay, you throw back another ale, as does she, and she actually hiccups just a hair, but she still looks like she's hanging in there.
Holst, another one.
Holst gestures to his server and shakes his head, seeming to appeal to some deity to get these drunk contests out of his bar at some point.
But we are paying this time.
Alright, that's your third fail. If you fail again, you have to start rolling on the fail checks. She downs another one, and once again hiccups and giggles. Roll another check. Alright, roll a D100, please.
Passed out drunk.
roll a D10. Alright, you take another drink, and you seem to look at her, and she seems extremely amused with your existence. And you're about to say something, and maybe you do, you can't quite remember. And then all of a sudden you sort of decide that you want to just lay down for a moment, and you vaguely black out.
The table is comfortable.
You come to, and you're moving, and you're trying to make it to your bed, and she's helping you, because she's nice like that. And that's the last thing you remember. You wake up 3 hours later in the evening, and you and the woman in your bed are both naked.
Well, that did not go how I thought it would.
She seems to be very, very out. That being said, she wasn't a bad catch.
Mertin will go back to bed. This hangover is too bad right now.
You go back to sleep. And when you awake in the morning, she is gone. Though she seems to have very neatly made your bed over you. And you feel awake, feeling very well rested.
Is all my stuff still here?
Yep.
Alright, good. That didn't go as bad as it could have been. Dreading what happens, he will go down to the bar and look sheepishly at Holst and ask how much was it.
Holst gives you a way too dangerously approving look and seems way too amused at your existence. And he leans on the bar rather heavily, and he says, "Now, I'm not going to judge you, Mertin, and I'm not going to say anything about what I may or may not have heard coming from one of my prestigious rooms last evening. All I'm going to say is that when that lovely young lady left, she decided to cover both your tabs."
Oh, that was surprising.
He rolls his eyes and says, "If you think that's surprising, then you must not remember much." And laughing very audibly, he goes back to washing a glass. Let's see, I'm going to put you over here. And she's gone now. And as you're standing there, you notice there is a little girl sitting on a stool not far from Holst, seeming to be kicking her legs back and forth as they're too high to reach the ground, or she's too high to reach the ground with them.
Is that a little girl? It looks like a bald guy.
If you zoom in, it is in fact a woman. But she is wearing a very elaborate cowl. Yes.
Okay, that's it.
She's covered in some pretty interesting robes that have a lot of death iconography picked out among it. She's a very bleak set of symbolism written all over.
Oh dear.
Hull seems to be very intentionally ignoring her presence at the moment.
Oh dear. Where's Michael?
You are... he's not there. Neither is the elf.
Holst, I think that I will want a drink to chase the ones from yesterday.
He nods, and as he starts passing it to you, your gaze sort of drifts from him to the drink, and as it does so, you catch the girl staring very, very intently at you.
Mertin will look at the girl and probably break the gaze when she keeps staring.
Okay, as you do, you hear her start laughing, and Holst seems to shake his head in some form of concern, and she leans on the bar and points to you, and she says, "I bet your wallet mouth."
Wallet mouth?
She nods and says, "Wallet mouth."
Mertin will look at Holst, confused.
He helplessly shrugs, and she giggles very audibly, and sort of leans more heavily against the bar. She says, "I'm just picking on you. You must be Mertin."
Yes, I am Mertin. Who would you be?
Holst opens his mouth, but before he can say anything, she says, "Oh, I'm Anna. Mikhail brought me here, and the elf."
Ah, hello, Anna. He will lean over to Holst. Did they really? That does not seem like them.
He gives you a glare that could only suggest that it is indeed true, and he's not particularly thrilled with them for doing it.
Mertin will up his payment of the drink to $1 and give Holst a sad, sympathetic look.
Holst nods appreciatively and takes the shilling and starts heading into the back. And Anna hops off her stool and approaches you, and she says, "So, you hunt people, right?"
Well, if you want to put it in those terms, that would be correct. You are familiar with both the elf and Mikhail?
She nods and says, "Oh yes, I've met them a few times. The elf helped me once, and Mikhail knew my grandfather. Well, I guess technically they both knew my grandfather, but you don't know him, so that's kind of probably confusing that I keep calling him grandfather, but that's just what I'm used to calling him, so this probably doesn't make any sense."
Well, that is fine. The elf and Mikhail has not really told me what they are up to, so I probably would not have known him anyways.
She laughs and she says, "Oh, they're trying to find out who killed him." And then she sort of giggles. She sort of giggles and she says, "Well, I guess technically I killed him, but they're trying to find out who, like, actually killed." And then she sort of pauses, think thoughtfully, and says, "Actually, I guess that's rather confusing too."
Well, why don't we sit down at a table and you can tell me all about this? Mertin wants something between him and her.
She nods excitedly, runs forward, grabs your hand, and drags you to the nearest table.
Okay.
She jumps into a seat, and this girl cannot be older than, like, maybe 10 or 12. And she sort of bounces up and down excitedly in her chair. She says, "I've been really looking forward to meeting you. I've had dreams about all four of you, but I haven't gotten to meet you yet."
Mertin will look confused and then have a look of horror come over his face as he goes, dreams? Like, Michael? Those kind of dreams? Or just the dreams where the boot chases you?
She giggles and she says, "No, not normal dreams, silly. I have dreams where grandfather tells me about things that are going to happen, like meeting you guys."
That must be very nice.
She shrugs and she says, I see people die a lot, but grandfather says that's all okay, so I don't really worry about it too much." Her chipper demeanor is completely her chipper demeanor is completely opposed to her rather haunting words.
Channel switched.
Why was I moved?
We don't know.
Weird. What was I saying?
Grandpa says...
Alright. No, she giggles at your comment and says, "No, I see a lot of people die in my dreams, but grandfather says it's alright, so I try not to worry about it too much." Her very cheery demeanor seems completely at odds with the very horrific information she's detailing to you.
Mertin just has this look on his face as he's mentally comparing this girl to his daughter and shivering in horror.
She leans forward and she goes, "You must really miss your family. I'm sorry that you lost them. That must have been really hard."
Yes, it was.
She nods and she says, "But if it makes you feel better, they're okay now. Grandfather said they made it there all right."
Grandfather said?
She nods and she says, "Yes, my grandfather, more."
He's a priest?
More is the imperial god of death.
I know that. Mertin's trying
not
to
okay.
have that be the answer.
Just make sure. She giggles. She says, "No, silly. He's not a priest. And she sort of pauses for a moment. She says, "Well, I guess that's actually kind of hard to describe. But most people call him a god, though I don't think of him as that. He's too much of, he reminds me too much of Grandfather Ravencloak for me to think of him as that."
Well, what have you been doing in the Iron Bull now that they have left you here? It does not seem there is a lot for you to do around the bar.
She glares and shoots daggers with her eyes in Holst's direction, who seems to instinctively duck out of the way, despite the fact he's not looking in your direction. And she says, "I've been doing chores."
Well, chores build character, I have been told.
She groans and she says, "But I already have character, but I don't want to work. When I left the temple, I thought I wasn't going to have to do chores anymore. They just brought me to a place where I have to do more chores, despite the fact this place is smaller."
Well, I have bad news for you then. The chores, they never go away. You have just get more.
She groans and flops onto the table, rather pathetically. And she looks up at you and she goes, I just want to go on an adventure. I'm so bored here. But grandfather keeps telling me I have to stay.
Well, I suppose that the adventure of cleaning the corners of the floor is not very fun.
She sits up and pouts for a moment. And then she gets up and she walks over to you. And before you can react, she very deftly reaches her hand inside the pocket you keep the seal in and pops away from you and sits down in the chair next to you and starts looking at it.
So fast, no agility check.
So fast, no agility check.
Ah. Can I have that back, please?
She nods and she hands it back to you and she says, you should be careful with that. It reeks.
Reeks?
As you lean down to sort of sniff it instinctively, you don't smell anything strange about it. And she nods and she says, a lot of people who have held that aren't here anymore.
Ah. Thank you for telling me that.
She shrugs and she says, well, you seem really nice, so I'd like you not to die. At least not before you're supposed to die, because I guess everyone's supposed to die, but you should live until you're supposed to die.
Yes, that would be very nice.
She leans back and she sort of stares at you very intently for a moment. She says, so why'd you come to Nuln? I know why the other three came here. They're actually a little bit more obvious than you. I don't know why you came here, though. Grandfather seems to find you the most interesting.
Well, I don't know if that was very settling, but I came because I was looking for a man.
And then she goes, oh, I know him. He has a lot of blood on his hands. That man isn't a very good man.
Yes, that is very true.
She leans heavily on one of her elbows and looks at you and she says, so are you going to kill him?
I would prefer to turn him in for justice sake. There are many victims to his crimes.
And she giggles and she says, oh, that's probably why grandfather likes you. You actually think about justice. Most people just kill nowadays.
Well, it is the one thing that separates the thug from the bounty hunter. Well, some bounty hunters. He will grumble, looking away.
She seems to nod as if these are very sagely and wise words. And then she gets kind of her mood seems to get put out a little bit. She looks down at the table, kicking it, and she says, so, do you ever miss your family?
Yes. Mertin is incredibly uncomfortable with this conversation.
She frowns down at the ground. She says, I have trouble remembering my parents. My parents were killed by beastmen. I was really little. Grandfather Ravencloak saved me, but I didn't really know them that well. I don't remember them very much.
Well, you know, I did see some things that might interest you, Mertin will say, trying to find a different line of subject to talk with the 10-year-old girl that doesn't involve death.
She sort of glares up at you. She sort of looks up at you, frowns. She says, Do you think my parents would have liked me?
Well, I do not know them. For some children, it would be better that they did not have the parents they did. For others, yes, they would miss you. But on the other case, he will kind of dip his finger into his drink and draw a checkerboard on the table. So I saw this game. I was wondering, do you know how to play it?
She frowns, looking down at it for a moment, and then suddenly her eyes light up. She says, oh, yeah, Grandfather Ravencloak plays that all the time, though apparently he gets really mad when he loses, so most people don't like to play him.
Oh, have you ever played the game?
She nods, and she says, do you want to play?
I have never learned how to play the game, but I was thinking maybe it could be a distraction from your chores when you have the time.
She nods appreciatively, and then she takes out a small, very, very engraved and almost ancient-looking knife, and very, very carefully, saws a small splinter off the table and divides it up into enough pieces, and actually starts teaching you the rules of the game.
I glance warily at Holst because the table has been defaced.
He seems to notice, but he quickly looks away when he realizes you're looking at him and is whistling and very loudly as he cleans a glass that's definitely already clean. And as you two play the game together, she seems in a much, much better mood and seems much more like you would expect a 10-year-old girl to act. And yeah, she does very much remind you of your lost daughter. But not in a bad way.
Okay. When I finish that, I will go over to Holst.
Okay. And as you walk away, Anna is looking down very annoyed at the board of the game that you somehow miraculously managed to win, despite the fact she'd beaten you in every round before that point.
Well, that's when I walk away. Right after I win.
Gotta retain your championship title.
So, Holst, I think that you have been generous to us as we've been staying here. Do you think that you could get your hands on one of those boards? I probably can't pay for the expensive ones, but just something so that she has something to do, and maybe we'll keep her out of your hair. We will try to whisper the end.
Holst chuckles and says, I will certainly look into it. I think that can be arranged. And at that point, you hear the door not slam open, but definitely be barged open, and a very familiar squat figure walks in. The dwarf has arrived.
Hello.
When is this after?
This is about... this is roughly the fourth day of what you were doing. So you still have to go back the day after this. But you have successfully inscribed your rune, so you're pretty cheery.
Okay.
And you see Anna, who you have already met at this point, staring down at a table that seems covered in a bunch of beer lines with wood chips all over it.
I will look over to Mertin. There you are, bounty hunter. Where have you been?
Mertin will wave his bandaged fingers. I was practicing archery. I thought that it might be a good idea to be able to do things other than jump into the mouths of my enemies.
Well, if you had more working for you upstairs, you wouldn't be jumping into their mouths. But I'm not seeing why you're taking after the elf.
The elf? You will look confused.
The elf shooting bows.
Ah, well. You did very well with the crossbow, yeah? It was a useful thing?
A proper dwarven weapon.
Ah, Ulrich does not approve of the crossbow. He likes to have the weapons that you use with your own strength.
At this point, Anna sits down, somehow silently have crept up on both of you. She sits down next to the dwarf and she says, Grandfather doesn't mind crossbows too much, but I can see why Ulrich wouldn't like them.
Have you met Ulrich too?
She shakes her head and says, No, but I've heard rumors that he eats children, so that maybe that isn't for the best.
So I will blink at that.
Confused. Is there actually stories about that?
You have heard stories of that threatened to children, but as far as you're concerned, they're not actual myths.
Okay.
More of a, hey, you better behave or you're going to get smacked.
So I will ask for an ale from Holst.
He nods and he says, I've got some good beer in back that just came in if you'd prefer that instead, Master Dwarf.
Oh, most definitely.
He nods and goes to get you some.
Anything else besides shooting bows, Mertin?
I went and got some clothes. Mine have been pretty bloody lately. And I'm not the best at mending them. So I have met this young lady. He will gesture to Anna.
And
She
more
beams
grunt.
to be the center of attention for a moment.
Though I do realize that I have been, well, a little bit rude. I should have asked do you have a way you'd like me to address you, Sir Dwarf?
Just call me Mork. Everyone else does.
Well, I haven't because I haven't asked, and I thought I should. Very well, Mork. I will. Well, I'd say I'd buy you a beer, but I do not think that a beer is what you would want.
Host says he's bringing me something better anyway.
Holst approaches and he passes you a frothing mug of some beer he has not had in the shop before. And he also passes some of it to Mertin.
Mertin will nod his thanks.
Mertin, roll a consume alcohol check.
Mertin will pass out.
No, you won't pass out. Oh,
This
wow.
is good.
It tastes extremely good, and you are able to handle it. Dwarf, upon drinking some, this is definitely much more higher quality than you're used to, and you're surprised the human can drink it without making a face. He maybe has some dwarven tenacity after all.
Now this is a proper drink. Thank you, host.
He grins and says, I heard some dwarves that were coming in from Altdorf, and I bought some stock from them when I heard they were coming in.
Dwarfs from Altdorf.
He nods and says, heard they should be arriving not too soon, but some of their stock showed up a little early. To my understanding, the main bulk of their force ran into some sort of problem out of town.
Now, at this point, do I know about
No,
what...
that will happen in the next day.
Okay.
So you have heard a rumor of them, but you have not met them yet.
You said they were attacked?
He shrugs and says, I'm not sure what the holdup was. All I've heard is that they found something and were delayed.
Oh. Who actually delivered the ale?
He pats his hand on the keg and says, they had a runner that sent ahead to request some extra guard that rode out to meet them, but the runner brought some stock with him apparently and decided to go ahead and sell it, or at least I was able to get my hands on some for a, shall we say, pretty high price. Dwarves don't exactly sell cheap these days. And he nods his head to you, says, no offense, of course.
None taken.
Anna is frowning at the dwarf at this point, and she sort of pokes him, rather roughly, in fact, in the arm. She says, you lied to me.
What?
Mertin will look aghast.
She pouts and she says, you said that if I did that thing in the dark a certain amount of times each day, I would grow a beard just like yours. And she points at her very smooth chin.
I never said that.
And Holst smirks and she says, Holst said that wasn't true.
In a way, it is true.
Holst raises his hands as if ensuring that he's staying out of it and walks away from you. And Anna starts pouting. She says,
In the dark below the world, lass, many dwarves, all the dwarves have beards, so in a way, it does work.
She frowns at you and crosses her arms, and she says, you should have just told me I couldn't have one. You got my hopes up.
You know, Mork, I have not seen what was the word used for them? Groby with a beard.
Groby.
Yeah, you said in the dark, down below the world? That is where they hide, yeah?
Groby are down there as well as us, manling. Groby is goblin, manling.
Ah, I thought so. So why do they not have the beards?
At this point, Dwarf, you have the horrific realization that Mertin has followed a little too closely in the conversation. Unfortunately, not realizing that you have both fooled Anna and him simultaneously.
I will glare daggers at Mertin.
Mertin will look innocent and wondering what's going on.
At this, Anna actually looks reasonably perplexed, and she says, Does that mean there are greenskins with really long beards? Do they have green beards?
So I will begin to grumble underneath my beard.
Anna seems vaguely perplexed by this, but then Holst shouts something about needing her help from the back, and she does a little curtsy to both of you, and she says, well, I guess they have to get back to work, and as she passes by Mertin, she very quickly and shyly hugs hugs his side. She says, thanks for playing with me earlier, and then she runs off to the back.
You're welcome. Mertin will look at the dwarf and shrug.
You are a Zaki, Mertin.
I assume that is not a compliment.
No.
Oh well, we can't all be dwarves. And he will take a drink.
Holst approaches you, wiping a little bit of sweat from his brow before reaching underneath the bar with an aha gesture, and he pulls out a letter and waves it in Mertin's direction. He says, "Guess what's ready for you, lad?"
Oh, is it bounty?
He frowns and says, "No, I still haven't received anything about a bounty."
Oh, then that is for the pelt?
He nods and says, "It's ready. You should take Master Dwarf down here with you. He might be able to help you haggle a better deal."
Oh, that would be nice. Mertin will look confused for a second. Better deal? What does the letter say?
He frowns and looks and says, "Just that it's ready, but I didn't pay it for you."
Ah, okay. Well, dwarf, if you want to come, you can come.
How much do these things normally cost, Holst?
He shrugs and says, "That depends on what kind of quality he made out of it. If it's as good as he should have made it, he'll probably sell for at least 20 gold.
So I understand if you want to stay, this is the first dwarf ale that has been in here for a while.
Save more for me, Holst. I need to get me a little more exercise today.
Holst nods and says, "Take care of yourselves."
I will down the rest of the drink. Actually, I will pour it into my tankard and take
Stick it with you.
Oh, Holst, where do I meet this man?
He pulls out a map and points to... He sort of draws some lines, giving you some directions, and says, "Its name is It's Gustav's Tanner. Obviously, it's run by Gustav, and he should give you a pretty fair shake. Just don't expect him to be overtly nice. He's a rather grim fellow, but he's the best there is in the entire city. I give my word on that."
Alright, thank you for that.
Mort will chuckle at the word grim manling, as if such a thing can't exist.
Alright, unless Mork has something he would like to do, I
Nope.
think that I will head
Lead
out
on,
before it
Manly.
gets dark.
Alright, y'all make your way out, and without too much concern, you make it to Gustav's Tanner. The dwarf has finished off his beer, though he looks sourly down at his mug when it's empty. And you make it there without too much incident. And as you head in, it's pretty hot inside. Oops, I should probably spawn a dwarf.
I am just a ghost.
Invisible dwarves are not a thing, thankfully. Alright, y'all enter a rather large tanning shop. And you can hear some bellows being worked and see a bit of smoke not coming from a room on the right.
Mertin will look around to see if there's any sign or anything that says that, like a bell or anything that shows what he should do to get a hold of the person, rather
There's
than barge
nothing.
into his workshop.
So Morik will call out, "Oi, anyone here?"
You hear a small clanging sound, and a rough voice calls out, "Come into the back."
Alright, thank you. Mertin will head to the back.
As you head in, you see a man sitting on a stool, staring into some rather hot coals, one of which has some sort of hide draped over it, as he seems to be heating it. And he sort of turns on his seat and looks at the two of you. And he is wearing a pretty impressive, very, very intricate workman outfit. He's got a leather apron that has all sorts of it's beautifully crafted. Like, it is extremely well done. And it's covered in all sorts of very intricate writings of some sort, but neither of you recognize the language.
Merton will nod his head and say, "Hello, I assume that you are Gustav?"
He nods and says, "And who are you?"
"I am Mertin Krieg. I understand that Holst brought by a pelt that to be worked."
He sort of looks you up and down and squints his eyes and he says, You're the man that the Holst, brought by a wolf pelt for."
Yes.
Yes, this daft Zaki punched a wolf.
He
It was
changes.
2 wolves.
He changes his glare from Mertin.
The second one was mine.
He changes his glare from Mertin to Morek, and he says, "It's been a long time since one of your folks bothered wandering in here."
Yes, well, I have reasons.
He shrugs and he says, "Dwarves make good work. The few I've worked with have all been fairly appreciative, though I suspect that they tend to get a little too jealous of my work."
Merton will look curiously at the dwarf.
Get too curious of your work?
He frowns down. He frowns at you from his seat and scratches one of his arms, and he says, "Dwarves don't work leather as well as they work metal. Any honest Dawi can admit that."
Sure.
Sure. He sort of smirks in your direction, as if he was expecting something a little different from that, and turns his attention back to Mertin, and he says, "Not to mention, if you're that Mertin Krieg, then someone from the palace also came by and paid for your cloak."
Did they now?
He nods, and he says, "Unless there's another Mertin Krieg who happened to have another wolf pelt dropped on by a host that isn't you, then yes."
I would hope not.
Manling, what friends have you made in the palace to pay for things?
Well, I did finish a bounty that I have been told was of interest to the Countess, but I did not think that it would be that known. It was only, what was his name? Borgin the Red.
The tanner, or Gustav shrugs, and he says, "Never heard of him. But then again, I suppose I don't get out much."
Is there any of his pieces that are sitting around in this room that I can look at and evaluate?
If you look around a little bit, you can spy some suits of armor that he has in the other room, and he doesn't seem to make any sort of gesture or note of you wandering a little bit. You can perform an evaluate check if you wander into the other room. He seems to be focusing most of his attention on Mertin anyway.
I will do so.
He glares at Mertin for a moment. He says, "So, you killed one of the great wolves to the south of here?"
Yes, but that pelt I got in the Regwald up to the north. Right? Or was the map flipped?
No, that's right.
Okay.
He raises an eyebrow and he says, "The wolves in the forest are fairly rare to come out to attack anyone. I'm surprised you were able to engage them."
Yes, well, we were looking for bandits in the woods. We ran across some, as the dwarf says, groby, and then the wolves ambushed us not long after.
He nods, and he very briefly glances back at the hide warming behind him before turning his attention back to the two of you, and he says, "Very well then. I'll provide you with your cloak, but there's something that needs to be done first."
What is it?
He smirks and says, "You have someone to answer to."
I do.
He nods and he looks at a small, strange metallic contraption that seems to be ticking every few seconds. And he looks back towards the door and he says, "He should be here any moment now." And both of you hear the door slam open.
So I will finger my the axe, or the head of my axe, just slightly.
Okay. In walks a man who is has a very, very immaculate white wolf pelt that the head of it is over his head, sort of like a helmet, flows all the way down behind him, and he's wearing mostly white plate. And he looks very, very experienced in the ways of war, and has a lot of pretty old, fading scars on his face. Some look newer, and he looks like, and he has a very massive axe equipped behind him.
Mertin will genuflect his respect to his superior or elder. What would that be? Would that be like just a nod, or?
Yeah, it's up to you.
He will give a.
Gustav leans over and says, "Ah, Magnus, you're here." The man nods and he glares directly at Mertin and says, "So you're the one I understand to have killed a wolf."
That is true. Yes.
He steps forward until he's almost standing chest to chest with you, and he towers about a good 5 inches over you. And he glares down at you and he says, "And you claim to have killed it using only your fist?"
Yes, I did kill it with a punch.
He stares down at you. Take a willpower check.
Oh great, I'm awesome at these.
Okay, he grabs you.
I can fortune point that, right?
You can if you want, yes.
Yeah, I think I want to try that. Let's just dig a deeper hole. Ah, there we go.
Dice don't lie, as the saying goes. He grabs you by the front of your leather... what do you have, a leather jack or leather jerkin?
I have a leather jack.
Okay. He grabs you, and he has such a strong grip, he's actually able to twist the leather enough to pick you up off the ground. And he glares at you, and he says, "And you're sure you're not lying to me, boy?" And you are very intimidated.
So Mork will look up at this guy. "Manling, let the other manling go, please."
He stares down at you for a moment and slowly turns his attention back to Mertin, who is very intimidated, as I remind you.
So Sotek.
Yes.
I'm assuming that at this point I should ask, what do I know about the ritual of killing the wolf with a weapon you've made or with your own hands?
As far as you have learned, what you did was perfectly legal. You did, in fact, land a death blow on a large wolf with nothing more than weapons given to you by nature, being your own fist.
All right.
You have to be honest with him, as you failed your intimidation check.
Yes.
He pauses for a moment, and then he not so gently sets you down. And he turns down to the dwarf. He turns and looks at the dwarf, and he says, "Dawi, does this man tell the truth?"
Yes, he does.
He scowls and he says, "Will you give your oath then?"
I shouldn't need to, but I will.
He pauses for a moment, and then he turns back to Mertin and says, "What is your name?"
My name is Mertin Krieg.
He nods and says, "And where do you hail from?"
I am from Middenheim.
He nods approvingly and says, "Just looking at you, I can tell you were not raised Ulrican if I had to guess. Sigmarite, perhaps."
Yes.
And you
He
turned.
looks a little bashful at that.
He frowns at you, and he says, "Yet you decided to turn to our god. A better god, a stronger god. Why?"
Ulrich respects those who take upon themselves the strength to defend what they want and what they have. I do not want to cower behind a protector.
He pauses for a moment, thoughtfully, and then he hears the dwarf snort and gives him a pretty dangerous sideways glare before turning his attention back to Mertin. and he leans against the wall for a moment, and he looks at your weapons, or he sort of gestures and says, "What do you wield then? How do you fight?"
I use a bola, I use the sword and the shield. I am learning to use the longbow.
He frowns at you and he says, "If you wishes to protect yourself, why not use a gun?"
I only have so much money.
He raises an eyebrow and says, "Is that the only thing preventing you from using one, then? Finances?"
Well, that is the trading.
He nods and says, "So if you could, you would wield such a weapon."
I would aspire to one day, yes.
He shakes his head disapprovingly. And he seems to think for a moment. And he reaches back for his... And he looks around for a table. And he steps over to... into this room. And he turns to Gustav and says, "I might make a small mess if you don't mind." Gustav just waves him off and turns to deal with the hide tanning. And he turns and says, "Follow me, Mertin." He steps into this room, and he very loudly, and he sort of just very quickly clears a space on all these hides lying off this table, leans against it, and presses his elbow down, holds up his arm towards you, and he says, "I want to see how strong you are."
Mertin will be prepared to get his ass kicked.
Okay, you clasp onto his wrist, and he clasps onto yours. Roll a strength check. Okay, as you both start leaning your weight and your strength against one another, you take an early upper hand and start pushing him down towards the bench. Roll another strength check. He seems to strain very visibly, but as do you, and he slowly forces you up a little bit, but you're keeping it pretty hard in your favor. Roll again. Okay. As you're both shaking with exertion, with sweat pouring down, the room seems to get hotter and harder. Suddenly, you let out a grunt of effort and slam his hand down onto the bench. He looks very surprised and seems to nod to himself and rubs out his arm for a moment. And he frowns at you for a time and says, "I'll be honest, I'm skeptical of you, Krieg."
Well, I am skeptical of myself sometimes. But I will do what I can. I will do my best.
He nods. And after pausing for a longer moment, he stands up and says, "Very well. I'm satisfied enough to proceed." And he heads back into Gustav's room without saying anything to either of you. As he enters the room, he barks something at Gustav in a tongue neither of you recognize. And Gustav looks at him for a moment, and he steps over to a bench and tears back a tarp. And beneath it, you see an unbelievably gorgeous, very, very well crafted cloak made completely out of the wolf hide. And you see that he's actually managed to keep the top half of its head completely intact, almost as if you would expect a taxidermist to do, with its fangs even still there. And you almost can see the gleam of metal beneath it. And the Ulrican pauses for a moment, looks at Gustav and nods appreciatively, and Gustav goes back to sitting and staring at the hide crackling above the coals. And the Ulrican places his hands down upon the cloak, and you can hear him whispering to himself. And as he does so, both of you can feel the hairs on the back of your head stand up, and the temperature in the room seems to be going down.
Mertin will look around in a little bit of awe, because he probably didn't think he'd ever see this happen.
Mark, shrug.
Morik, your beard gets a little prickly. After a few moments, the darkening cold seems to subside. And he looks down upon the cloak and nods appreciatively. And right before he grabs it, like as his hand is hovering about an inch away from it, both of you can swear you can almost see a blue glowing tint off of it. But the moment he lays his hand upon it, it disappears. And he picks up this black cloak, nods at it appreciatively, and approaches Mertin holding it. Boop, boop, boop. I'll put him back here so it doesn't look like he's standing on it. And he holds it out to you, and he nods and says, "Wear it well, Mertin Krieg. Our god is watching you."
I will strive to be worthy of the honor, and Mertin will respectfully take the cloak.
Okay. Add a Ulrican wolf cloak. You might want to make a note somewhere that it's black colored. To your inventory, and I will go over the details of that item with you at the end of the session. Magnus pauses for a long moment, staring at you and down at the dwarf in the back of you, and he nods and says, "For whatever reason, it seems that Ulrich has blessed your efforts. I would advise you to come by the temple at some point in the near future."
I will do that.
He nods and pushes his way past both of you and leaves without another word. Gustav glares in both of your directions, and he says, "Well, are you waiting for a medal? Get out of my shop already."
Alright, just a second. You said he nods and then it sounded like it cut out.
He tells you to get out. Oh, wait, the Ulrican?
Yeah.
He nodded and shoved his way past the two of you.
Okay.
He doesn't say anything further after he tells you that he expects you to come by the temple at some point.
Alright, we will leave. Or I will leave. I don't know what the dwarf does.
Yeah, it looks like the dwarf left. Alright, and you return to the Iron Bull.
Doesn't seem like you needed me much. Nothing.
Well, sorry. Shall I buy you a drink?
That would be fine.
Okay, the two of you approach the bar, and Holst, seeing you, nods, and he intentionally looks around, pretending to be overtly secretive before pulling out the keg and fills another tankard for the both of you.
Mertin will look at Holst with the eye of, how much is this?
Holst frowns at you for a moment, and he pats his hand on the keg, and he says, "I ain't going to charge you for each drink, but if you want me to get more of this stuff, you're going to have to pay for it yourselves."
Alright, well, I think the dwarf would want some. I will chip some in to help him, because I'm sure that he would like more.
He nods and says, "I can get some more from the Dawi for probably about 5 gold.
Mertin will chip in 3 gold, if that is okay, Morik.
And Morik will shuffle over too, yeah.
Okay. The coins vanish beneath Holst's palm as he passes over the table, and he nods and says, "I'll be sure it's taken care of then." Mertin, when you take a drink of it, take a consume alcohol check.
Ah, I can't flirt with death forever. Or at least unconsciousness. Or maybe I can.
Man, you're a tank in this stuff. You down another dwarf-approved ale, and you are not affected. You just feel pretty warm inside.
Mertin burps hugely and looks at the dwarf with a big grin on his face. This is great stuff.
Of course it is. Dawi ale.
Host looks moderately surprised in Merton's direction, because he's taken your measure in previous contests. At this, he leans conspiratorially towards the dwarf, and he says, "Our dear friend here had some interesting company the other evening.
Oh,
You can almost feel a tire track going over your back, Mertin."
Oh dear.
Someone interesting?
Holst nods and
yes?
Holst nods and grins and says, "Let's just say our dear Mertin had a warm evening and didn't spend it by himself. At least from what I was hearing down here."
Morik will chuckle.
Wait, where was the dwarf that night then?
I was
Or
gone.
will look confused.
Holst shrugs. "He wasn't in when I went to bed."
Have
And
you
he-
been very busy, Mork?
I have. And
Holst looks down with a raised eyebrow and says, "What have you been up to lately, Master Dwarf?"
well, if you can't tell already, you can kind of look at me and I'm covered in from top to toe in mail armor now.
Yes, since that is a very nice helmet you have there. Resolves the decoration.
I've been working out the kinks in my hammer arm.
Holst nods approvingly and says, he sort of smirks for a moment. He says, "I have to get you to make something for the inn at some point, something to prove I had a right and proper smith staying beneath my roof."
I have not reached the title of right and proper yet.
He
But
points
that's good and honorable.
he points at your mail and says, "That's right and proper by my standards."
Well, this is typical Dwarven Dawi mail. I haven't gotten to the level of the plate yet, which I'm yearning for.
He just waves his hand and says, "All I'm saying is, if you wouldn't mind providing me with some sort of nicely designed metal shield or something that I could hang on the wall, I'd be most appreciative."
I will talk to Master Snorri about that.
He chuckles for a moment and says, "Ah, you're working with Snorri. That explains a bit."
Oh, indeed.
He chuckles at some joke neither of you seem to know the punchline to in his head and wanders off.
So you have taken an apprenticeship then?
Not truly apprenticeship. I am working with another mastersmith.
Ah,
He's given me use of his forge and his anvil for the time I'm here. Providing I help.
Is it working out better than the human stuff you used the first time we met?
Oh, by far. I don't know what material that manling was using.
As you both are talking, you hear a small groaning sound, and you see Anna pass by with a wet rag pressed to the floor as she is attempting to mop and doing a rather poor job of it, but you're guessing she's pretty early on, and she just sort of passes by like almost a passing siren of just constant groan.
Where is Michael?
We need to keep an eye on that one.
So you say, apparently the elf and Mikhail brought her here.
Yeah, something about her grandfather dying. Holst
Yes.
is watching over her.
Her grandfather. Mertin will look
One of
uneasy at-
many, apparently.
Ah, well, do not ask too much about the one she often talks about.
Oh, I already know about the one she often talks about.
And you can stop pretending you can't hear us, by the way, Anna. Merton will say, just in case she's listening. Okay. good,
There
she
is
can't
no
hear us.
response.
I think I'm getting a little paranoid.
It's just the beer making you feel good.
Ah. That is different. Usually it, well, makes me pass out.
And drink
Have you
a few
heard-
more, and I think you will.
Have you heard what Michael has been up to? I have not seen him in a while.
I have not heard of anything about him or the elf.
Holst approaches the table for a moment and he says, I won't go into much detail about it because I don't know, but I'll just say that the two of them, the elf has been around quite a bit, though she passed out. I think she wandered off to take care of some work. To my understanding, the Morite's been tending to something up at the Temple of Mor.
Oh,
He shakes his head and says, the High Priest passed away, and it seems that our little doomsayer is the one overseeing the funeral, so to speak.
Really?
He nods.
Who is in charge of the temple now?
At this, he shrugs and says, not sure. I've heard rumors it's some sort of fat cat, but I can't say I've met the man myself.
That must bode well. I'm sure Mikhail is more than happy.
Mertin will look at the dwarf with a little bit of incredulity that the thought the High Priest of Mor dies and the Doomsayer is giving the rites is bodes well. But
No,
that's
I'm-
sarcasm.
Does that sound like sarcasm, Manly?
I have a hard time deciding. Maybe it's the drink.
Probably.
What time of day is it? Evening?
Yes, it is getting rather late.
Mertin will take another drink and see if he manages to stay awake.
Go for it.
Oh,
Yeah,
God.
you are doing great. Apparently, very hard beer is the way to go for you, Mertin.
This stuff is great. Did you know that you're my best pal, Moek? I do not think I have drunk like this in a long time.
Morik will raise an eyebrow at the word best pal.
From Morik's perspective, it is very surprising that Mertin seems almost sober.
Yeah.
Like, disturbing almost.
How often do you drink, Manly?
Well, there was that drinking contest, and then there was the other drinking contest, and then there's the evenings, and sometimes in the morning. I'm just glad that Rolf is paying for some of it. He'll shrug.
Built up a nice tolerance then, I think. Still, I wish I could see a little more sway in your step. It is a little unnerving to see a manling so able to take good dwarven ale without much effort.
Well, I think I will stop then. I would not want to frighten you. He will give a wink. He's a little drunk.
Do you wink with both eyes?
Yes.
But only one at a time, like one of those really weird-looking fish.
Well, if there's nothing else, I think I will head up to bed for now. Maybe I will visit the Temple of Ulrich and pay a visit to Holman.
Okay, you both turn in for the night?
Yep.
Alright. Mertin, when you come back down in the morning, the dwarf is already gone. As you come downstairs, Holst seems very expectant for you, and he's holding another letter in his hands.
Good morning, host.
He holds up and he says, finally got that bounty you were waiting on.
Ah,
He cracks it open and he looks down, and he seems to frown for a moment. And he looks back up to you and says, Felix Hines is the name of the man. And he hands you a pretty well-drawn picture. He's a fairly... he looks like he's a very large individual. Like, he almost looks like an ox if it stood on two legs and was given hands. And lost its horns. Like, he is built.
wow. That is a big man.
Holst nods and says, I hope they're paying you well, whoever's contracting you.
Well, I think they might have paid for the cloak. He will gesture at the cloak.
Holst looks very impressed and says, I'll have to make a note that Gustav's still doing his work as good as he used to. Been a while since I've seen him turn out something that high quality.
It is very fine. Magnus was there too.
He frowns for a moment and he says, Magnus? I don't believe I've met anyone named Magnus. At least not that I would expect to be in that part of the city.
So Gustav did seem to insinuate that you were once quite the man around here.
Holst sort of rolls his eyes and says, don't believe everything you hear, lad. I merely did my part.
Alright, then. He will give Holst a knowing look, or what he thinks is a knowing look.
Holst gives a not-so-convincing innocent look back.
Alright, then. Is there anything about finding this Felix?
He actually shakes his head and says, no information really came with it. Just that, really.
Ah, well. Looks like I will have to start somewhere. Mertin will look at the picture. Is there any distinguishing thing other than the big guy is massive?
He has a very notable cross scar over one of his eyes, and he also has a tattoo of Ranald on his shoulder.
Icy tingles go down Mertin's neck as he thinks he feels the presence looking at him.
Yeah, and it doesn't take long for you to notice a presence standing right next to you.
Ah, hello, Anna.
She looks up at the paper. She says, so, what are you looking at?
Apparently this man is Felix Hines.
She looks down and she says, he's big.
It would appear so.
She raises an eyebrow at you and she says, are you able to beat someone that big? He's way bigger than you are.
Well, we will have to see.
She sort of smiles and then she says, are you going out?
Probably. Say, Holst, has that game come yet?
Holst nods and gestures over to a table, and you see it lying on the table in the corner. Anna sort of almost desperately grips to your cloak, and she says, can you please take me with you? I need to get outside. I'm so bored.
Well, how about this? I will play a fun game with you. And then I will have to go. There's probably a lot of talking and walking that I will have to do. I'm afraid that it's not actually very interesting.
She looks gravely disappointed, but agrees to play a game with you. Roll an intelligence check.
Mertin purposely loses in a graceful fashion.
Actually... No, you stomp her pretty bad. Yeah. Much to both of your surprise, it's almost accidental have you win. She seems to make a mistake without realizing it, and it costs her the game. And she frowns down at the board, and then sighs and just thunks her head onto the table.
Well, when I get back, maybe you can have a bit of practice after your tours are done. There are other patrons you could try to get to play.
She seems to she perks up a bit and has a very suggestive glare in Holst's direction and the servers, and all of them seem to turn almost pale and immediately busy themselves with very mundane tasks.
That might not be a good idea if you bother the servers or Holst. There will be more chores to do because one of the workers will be gone.
She nods silently, but she has a very predatory look about her almost. Like there's almost an aura of dread now regarding her in this game.
You know what? There is this woman, Alexis, who might find it interesting to play a game with you.
At this, she perks her interest, and then she nods and starts very carefully setting up a new game.
Well, tell her if she wins, I will have another drinking contest with her.
Anna sort of giggles and shakes her head. seeming to laugh at something that you know she shouldn't know about, but you have a very creepy indication in the back of your head that she knows exactly what she's laughing at.
Mertin looks awkward, but gets up from the table and heads out.
Okay, you head out into the city. You have no leads on this man.
Yes, let's see. So, how does just a normal I walk around talking to people? I'm assuming I can't just go around to guards and saying, hey, who's this schmuck?
Well, you could, but you probably wouldn't be very successful. So what you'll do is basically tell me if there's a part of the city you want to go to, or an area that you've been to before, or an area you haven't been to. That can include guards or what have you. And you roll a gossip check, and you're just trying to gather information. That being said, you will have to ask a specific question, and depending on how well you roll on your gossip check, you may or may not gain pertinent information. And once you have enough puzzle pieces, you may then attempt to find out where he actually is.
Alright, I think I'm going to start in Westdorf.
Okay, you head out of the northern gate of the city and head into the slums of Westdorf and begin your search for Felix Hines.
I will wander around, going into what they refer to as taverns, or could be said, maybe paying the few coppers to buy some drinks and ask around for a Felix Hines. He looks like a big man, and I think I wanted to, well, try an armless wrestling competition, test my strengths.
Okay, the bar you spend a little money at, go ahead and roll your first gossip check. You do not gather any pertinent information from them. None of them admit, if they do know him, to having ever met him.
Do I get a perception check to try to see if they're hiding things from me? Or...
Yes, you may. Good job.
Obviously not. These are good, salt of the earth people.
That being said, you do have your regular amount of rerolls every day. And you get 2 days of searching before the next group session will take place. And this is the first day.
Okay. So I could re-roll that gossip check.
Yes, you may re-roll either of them.
I think I'll try the gossip check.
Nope. That being said, you might try venturing somewhere else. You might try venturing places where you have allies, or you might try venturing to places where you know they might be interested in information you can give them, or money, or things, whatever.
Well, I think I will go and... Where is the Temple of Ulrich in this town?
The Temple of Ulrich is in the Temple District, along with the Temple of Mor, and they are all vaguely in the Nudistad area, near the University of Nuln.
Where was Holman at?
Holman lives... Let me find a better color. Green. Holman lives over here in the Cotman district, pretty close to the Western Gate.
Alright, I'll go through to the temple first, and then I'll head to the Cotman district.
Okay, upon trying to get into the Temple District as you arrive, because the Temple of Mor is a little bit separated from the rest of them, you find that there seems to be some sort of commotion going on, and you see a lot of people wearing Sigmarite garb or carrying symbols of Sigmar on some kind of... It's almost like a mass protest, and it's nearly impossible to get into the Temple District. Something very strange is going on.
Does there anyone who is not brandishing Sigmar's sign also around?
You see some very concerned-looking guards.
I will go over to the guards. Do you know what is going on?
One of them sort of shrugs and he says, "All we know, sir, is that the temple was apparently just taken over by some new guy. Ever since he's taken over, things have been getting a little hairy around here. I've never seen them stirred up like this."
Is it Sigmar's temple?
He nods, And you note that most of the people who are screaming and shouting are saying something along the lines of "It's the end of days," Sigmar's punishment is coming for the city. Comments are descending from the sky that it's it's Mordheim all over again. The mood is pretty apocalyptic.
Wow, that is a lot of replacements. I heard that High Priest of War has also been replaced after his death.
Another soldier nods and says, "Aye, that's pretty much the only temple you can get to right now. The Black Wolves have been called in to guard the rest of them, and it's pretty locked down."
Well, thank you for letting me know. I hope that things don't get out of hand. He will nod to the guards and continue on.
Okay.
If the guard has nothing else to say.
No,
He
nothing
will
important.
politely wait for a response. All right.
The guard seems to be sweating, notably at the idea of things getting out of hand, but nods his thanks.
All right, I will head to see Holman.
All right, you make your way over towards the Kotman district, and you actually have to pass through one of the gates to get there. Despite that, between your seal, which you very discreetly show the guards at the gate, you are allowed to pass, and this time you are not bagged. And you are allowed to wander freely.
Oh, yay.
You make your way, following the directions he gave you, to the Kotman district, which is pretty low middle class. It's definitely not anything super impressive, but it's not a shanty town. And you find his small 2-story abode without too much trouble.
I will go to the door and knock.
Okay, you knock on the door, and a small, fairly attractive, comely woman, woman opens the door, and she looks at you and she says, "Can I help you?"
Yes. My name is Mertin Krieg. I am looking for Holman.
Her eyes light up. She says, "Oh, you're Mertin? Please, come in. My husband's told me so much about you. Apparently we owe you quite a great deal of thanks."
Well, it was nothing. Mertin will take off his hood as he goes in, politely and respectfully, because I'm assuming that's a thing?
Eh.
Oh well. He'll do it anyways.
You can make it a thing, I guess. You enter their home. It's quaint. It's clean at the very least, and there's a little bit of furniture. She quickly busies herself dusting off, making sure you have a nice place to sit. And you can see a couple of small toys lying around the floor that definitely indicates that there's probably a child somewhere in the home. But you don't see anyone. The wife gestures for you to take a seat.
Mertin will sit down. So how are things going for you? I hear was the move well?
She nods and says, "Oh yes, we didn't have much to bring, but thankfully Holman's new job has been bringing in quite a few coppers. We're used to not seeing any brass whatsoever, and now he's almost making a silver every 2 weeks."
Glad to see that things are going better.
She nods and says, "Oh yes," and she gets a really serious look on her face, and she says, I do want to thank you, by the way, for your warning. We heard the rumors about what happened down in the southern district, and it's so terrible to hear."
Mertin will unconsciously kind of rub his hand over one of his scars and go, "Yes, it was pretty bad."
She nods and says, "We've been making sure to get our water from the river, and just making sure to treat it a little bit, just because it is the River Reich after all. But we've been good, and there's no sickness or anything here. Our little one's doing well."
Oh, good.
She sort of smiles and looks upstairs. She's sleeping right now. It's so hard to get the little monster to bed.
Well, I have a feeling that I will be sympathizing with you soon.
She gives you a questioning look. She says, "Are you starting a family?"
No, a companion of mine seems to have found himself a young lady that is under his charge.
She sort of giggles and she says, "That almost sounds scandalous, but I don't want to suggest anything inappropriate."
Well, I doubt it was scandalous. He's a doomsayer.
She almost looks like she got slapped if Somber had a physical form. And nods quietly. She says, would you like something to drink or eat, perhaps? I've got some freshly made pastries.
That would be very nice, thank you. Is
She
Holman
gets-
still on his shift?
She nods as she goes to the very tiny kitchen. But she brings you out a small, whatever the hell Nolan has for pastries. Because I'm too lazy to look at this exact moment, don't judge me. And she hands you one, and it is fucking delicious.
Oh, thank you. Have you considered, expanding the kitchen and trying to sell some of these?
She laughs and says, oh no, I much prefer spending most of my time at home with the girls right now.
Ah, well, that is good too.
She nods and says, so, what brings you here? I know Mertin said you could join us for dinner, but he probably won't be home till much later tonight. They're awfully busy trying to get the East Gate back into something defensible, especially with some of the rumors coming in.
Ah, well, I wanted to check up on him, make sure that everything was going fine.
She nods and says, are you sure there wasn't anything else? He is doing well, though. Thank you.
There is something. A companion of mine said something about some men or creatures that have been trying to stalk the streets. Some cutpurse or something is what he made it sound like. Have you seen anything around in this district?
She frowns and shakes her head. She says, no, sir. Though after what happened to the Southern District, there has been a really strong increase of the presence of the guard around here lately. It feels very safe, but also sort of frightening, if I'm honest.
Well, it is good to know that the guard has been increased.
She nods, and after a bit of a pause, she says, if you need anything, please don't hesitate to tell us. We really do owe you everything.
Well, I was intending just to see how you are doing. I was going to consider asking Holman about a man that I have been asked to look for.
She sort of turns her head. She says, oh, may I see?
Merton will show her. So is there writing on the bounty or just the picture?
There is some scribbles, yeah.
Did Holst seem to insinuate that the scribbles are important?
From the way he talks about it, it's probably just the man's name.
Alright, then he will show her the picture.
She nods, and then she sort of sighs and rubs her eyes. She says, I'm sorry, I haven't had much sleep. My name's Clara, by the way.
Merton will look stricken for a second, and then recover and say, well, it is nice to meet you, Clara.
She sort of squints at you for a moment, but then looks down at the paper, and she says, oh, I've seen this man.
You have?
She nods and says, yes, he works on the gate with my husband. She goes, well, I suppose not with him, but I've seen him there working on the gate, though I've never personally met him. He's rather large.
Yes, it seems he is a rather large man.
She nods and says, I've seen him pick up one of the bars they used to usually hold one of the gates all by himself. It was pretty frightening, actually.
Really? That is quite a feat.
She nods and says, are you hunting him? No, I don't mean that to be rude or anything. My husband just mentioned you were some sort of bounty hunter.
Yes, there's someone who thinks he might have some information. They want to have a talk with him.
She seems to be chewing on her lip a little bit as she thinks. She says, I'll be sure to tell Holman you came by and that you're looking for him. I'm sure he might be able to help you.
Alright, thank you for that. Is there a place where he goes to relax after his work shift?
She shakes her head and says, normally he just comes straight home. But he did say something about going to visit, trying to surprise you over at where you're staying. I think I heard that you're at the Iron Bull these days.
Yes, that is true.
She nods and says, I was there when I was younger once. I worked for Holst when I was probably about 5 years younger.
Oh, really?
She nods and says, he was a good boss. Didn't let anyone mess with us girls. It was a pretty rare treat, honestly.
It seems that a lot of people have worked with Holst.
She shrugs.
Right. Well, it has been nice meeting you, Clara. I think I will be heading out now. Let Holman know I stopped by, yeah?
She nods and promises you that she will do that. Okay, as you make your way back out into the city, it is getting towards evening as you have been venturing quite a ways.
So, Sotek, when you shadow someone, do you have to move silently and concealment rolls along with it, or is it just shadowing?
You only roll shadowing. The only reason you would need to roll like concealment or silent move, shadowing is the art of following someone from a good enough distance and stealthily enough that it assumes the other two.
Okay. Then I want to wander over towards the gate. Maybe put my big Ulrich cloak of obviousness in my backpack.
Okay.
And try to look a little more commonplace. And then I want to head over and try to shadow him as he leaves the gatehouse, the Felix.
Alright. By the time you make it over to the gatehouse, you are not able to locate Felix. It seems he may already be gone.
Alright, I will head back to the Iron Bowl then.
Okay.
I want to make a perception check that no one's following me, though.
Okay, roll it. You do not believe anyone's following you.
Oh, good.
Okay, you return to the Iron Bull. By the time you get home, it is pretty damn late in the evening. Anna appears to have already gone to bed, and you almost swear you can hear her snoring from upstairs.
Wow, that is going to take some getting used to. So, the room's empty, correct?
Mostly, yeah.
I will nod to Holst and go up to my room.
Okay, turn in for the evening?
Yes.
Alright, you wake up. This is your last day before the party will be gathering.
I'll look around to see if I see Holman just in the area, because it seems like he works an afternoon shift.
He works an evening shift, yes. And as you move downstairs, you actually are very, very good at predicting what I'm about to do, and you indeed find Holman. The giant version.
The giant Holman.
There we go. You find him, and sitting next to him is a certain mischievous imp.
Hello, Holman. I see how you have met Anna.
He nods, and he seems to have been laughing a lot before you arrived. He says, "Oh, it's good to see you. Clara told me that you were looking for someone."
Yes, and I wanted to stop by and see how you were doing.
He nods and says, "I'm doing well," and he holds up his hands, which are a little bit bandaged, and he said, "Got a little beat up, a couple of splinters, but nothing serious."
Good to hear that it was nothing serious.
As you're both sitting there, Anna is eating something Holst apparently seemed to have cooked for her, and she's being rather noisy, but doesn't seem too overtly concerned about being super polite for either of you.
Hello, Anna. It is morning.
She says something to you, but with all the food in her mouth, it's impossible to understand what it is.
So, when you were at the temple, did they teach you manners?
She swallows, and she almost takes on this, like, disturbingly effeminate appearance for her. And she goes, "Oh, yes, sir. They taught me all about being proper, being sure to eat with my mouth closed, and never going outside, and not supposed to talk against my elders, and do all my chores." And then she gets a really irritated look on her face and starts eating with her mouth open again. And
good. At least you have been taught if you need to.
Holman looks extremely amused and shakes his head.
So you do realize that the way you are eating produces, well, lots of crumbs, which means more work sweeping floors.
As you say that, Anna seems to slow down her chewing thoughtfully and chews with her mouth closed, and she almost seems to consider glaring at you, but then just sort of turns down to her food. And Holman raises an eyebrow at you, and he says, There's no way you haven't been a father.
Mertin will shrug.
At this, Holman actually gets a kind of sad look on his face, and he says, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that.
It's okay, it has been a while.
He nods.
Mertin will turn to Holman. So I hear that you have been working hard at the gate, yeah?
He nods with a firm look, and he says, and I hear that you're going after the bull.
Is that his name? Or his nickname?
He nods and says, from when most of the men talk about him, yeah, he's a behemoth of a man. I have a hard time believing he's not at least half ogre.
Is that big?
He nods and says, I know that you're supposed to hunt him down, but I would really urge you to be cautious. He's really very strong.
Well, they can't all be easy.
He reaches across the table and grabs your arm and he says, if you can just give me a little time, I think I can help you.
I wouldn't want you to take a risk.
He shrugs and says, you've done enough favors for me. I think it's only fair that I return the favor.
Well, what do you think you can do?
He leans away from you a bit and he says, I think I know where he's going at night when he goes to relax, but I haven't quite managed to follow him all the way there yet. He seems to be willing to tolerate my presence, so I'm thinking of trying to just go with him as a friend, so to speak. Maybe I can find somewhere where he'll be vulnerable for you to get him.
That could be very dangerous. Why were you following him to begin with?
He sort of pauses for a moment and says, well, it wasn't so much me following him as there's a small group that seems to be drawn to him, quite likely due to his strength. People trying to influence him. I've been trying to keep those guys away from him because he seems like he just, quite frankly, doesn't want to be bothered. But if you're hunting for him, he puts up with me well enough.
Well, is he a objectionable man? He seems like someone who would, well, just like to be left alone.
He nods and says, I've never seen him hurt anyone, not even a fly. He's strong, that's for sure, but he's pretty quiet and keeps to himself. And he nods and says, that's why I'd like to find somewhere where he's comfortable for you to talk to him. Maybe you don't have to fight him if all you're needing is information.
That would work, if I can get the information.
He nods and says, well then just give me a few days. I can figure something out.
Alright, but do not take any risks. How to get a message to me if you need my help? Mertin will pause for an instant and consider.
Anna is boring into you.
Yes, Anna?
And she swallows the food she's eating, and she turns and she says, he could send a message to me. I knew he was coming here. Grandfather told me.
Ah, yes.
The Holman seems to blink and looks down at her and says, do I know your grandfather? And at this, Anna just sort of giggles and shrugs and goes back to eating.
So, this is Anna. I do not know if you have met Mikhail.
He shakes his head.
Mikhail is a doomsayer of more.
At the mention of this, he instantly makes the sign of the hammer over his chest and looks very concerned.
Mertin will nod, completely understanding. Say, Holmes, or Holman, do you know anything about the ruckus over at the Temple District?
At this, he gets a bit of a dark look on his face and shakes his head and says, all I've heard is that there's some new high priest who's stirring up trouble. I've been staying away from it, though. I don't want to be anywhere near when that thing boils over.
That is a good idea. Mertin will look at Anna.
Anna looks back at you and has a very knowing smirk on her face, but continues eating and doesn't seem to be offering up any information for once.
Anna, would you like to play another game?
She gives you an appraising look. She nods slowly, but she seems to be wary.
So I'm sure that there is something that you would like to know that I know. And I think there may be something I would like to know that you know.
She pauses for a moment and looks at the both of you, and she nods slower.
If you win, I will tell you something that I know that you might like to know. And if I win, you might answer, well, my unspoken question. What do you say?
She puts down her utensils and goes over to get the game and starts setting it up. And brings it back and starts setting it up on y'all's table. Holman nods and he says, "If we're clear, then I should get going."
All right, then. Anna should be able to let me know if we're in trouble.
He gives Anna a wary look and then nods and heads out. Okay, the game begins against Anna. Roll intelligence check. Oh, she wrecks you. Within 4 turns, you realize that you are in serious shit. And by the 10th turn, she has utterly obliterated you at the game.
Have you been practicing this?
She gives you an almost... her eyes seems to twinkle a bit. She says, "That lady you were talking about's not bad, but I got a lot better than she is pretty quick."
Well, poor Alexis. Mertin will shake his head. Well, what would you like to know?
She seems to pause for a long time, thinking very carefully, and then she looks up a little sheepishly and she says, "How did you lose your family?"
Mertin will look sad, pause for a minute or so, gather his courage and say it was a plague. I believe that it was called cholera. It happened, I think, 10 years ago.
Anna nods and sort of kicks her feet down at the ground. And she looks back up at you and she says, "You can't do anything about what's going on in the Sigmarite Church."
Well, is there anything I need to be worried about?
She shrugs and she says, "I don't know. Grandfather hasn't shown me that yet."
Well, that could be a good thing.
She nods and she says, "I like you, so can I tell you something?"
Mertin will look wary, but say yes.
She nods and she says, "You're gonna need torches." And then she quietly scoots herself away from the table and goes very quietly back to her chores. It's very eerie when she's actually being serious.
Holst?
Holst looks up at you frowning.
I think I want some torches.
He raises his eyebrow curiously, but nods and says, "All right, I can have some sent over."
Thank you.
He nods. "Would you like to turn in for the evening? Day, whatever."
Well, I just came out, and this is the last day for me to go find information if I want to.
There's very little that you can glean at this point.
I'll go practice archery then.
That is an acceptable response. You go practice archery with a very dreadful feeling about torches bothering your mind every time you see one.
Yes.
You go practice, and by the end of that day, you're getting pretty good.
All right. When I come
Not great,
back, I will
but good.
ask Coleman about getting flasks of oil.
You mean Holst?
Yeah, Holst.
Holst sort of sucks on his teeth for a minute and he says, "That's not an easy task to fulfill. Stuff's pretty expensive. If there's enough in stock, I'll talk to what connections I have, but I can't promise anything."
Well, it was a hope that it might make things easier. I think I would very much like some.
He nods and says, "That being said, I did get those torches you were asking for, though I'll need a little recompense if you don't mind. I apologize."
Oh, there's no problem.
He pulls out 10 torches that are well done, and he tells you that they have been weatherproofed to make sure that rain or even getting completely soaked will not ruin them.
Thank you, Holst. I will give Holst what he asks.
Okay, he asks... Give me a second. Torches, where art thou? Let's see, starvation, getting drunk, torches. For 10 of them, he charges you... 50. Let's see. He charges you about... He charges you about five silver for 10 of them.
Alright.
Alright. And do you want to go turn in?
I'll look around the tavern. No one interesting.
No one interesting.
Alright, I will turn in then.
Okay. As you go upstairs into your room, you do find a small drink having been left on your shelf next to your bed. And it's the same drink that you had with Alexis in y'all's drinking contest, but there's no sign of her.
I will briefly consider that locking doors might be useful, considering I do leave things in my room.
Eh.
I will take the drink and go to sleep.
Okay. In the morning, you wake up to the sound of someone slamming open a door downstairs. And I mean slamming. Like, it sounds like a troll almost smashed its way into the room.
I will quickly get ready and head down.
Okay. You head down the stairs, and as you get to about the bottom of the stairs, with your cloak being tied on around you, you see the elf and Mertin not far ahead of you, both staring forwards, and the dwarf standing in the doorway looking exceedingly angry. And that is the end of the session. Thanks everyone so much for watching as I'm running around these different maps getting stuff that I need. I hope you guys are enjoying the series. We have a very interesting session coming up next time. I hope you all enjoy it. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.